Hello, and welcome to Film Rant. So we've finally hit the big one, Star Wars The Force Awakens, directed by JJ Abrams. No George Lucas in sight. I'm not the biggest Star Wars fan and I'm not heavily invested in the universe, but I am someone who will happily watch them over and over again, so I was looking forward to this one. Everything I say in this review is solely based off the movies only. I'm not taking into account any of the extended universe books, TV shows or games. Disney have said anyway that the only entities canon now are the original and prequel trilogies, the Clone Wars TV series and a novel called A New Day set before Star Wars Rebels. Now, this review will contain many spoilers right from the start, so beware. Like me, I'm sure many of you went into the theatre all giddy and excited and then looked at your friends and just says,
"Hey you guys, what if the movie sucks?"
So, does it? Well, the short answer is no, but obviously I'm going to go into more detail on that. So let's start with our new protagonists, Rey and Finn. Rey is sort of like the new Anakin/Luke character. She's not really a slave, but she has to salvage parts off of a crashed Star Destroyer in order to earn portions of food. She also hails from the sandy Tatooine-like planet of Jakku. Rey's path is very similar to Luke's. She's Force sensitive, but doesn't really know she is, and doesn't fully understand how to use the Force. Is she likeable? Absolutely. She has the perfect balance of fun and serious, and she appears to have a mysterious past. Her relationship with Han is wonderful to watch as she's equally gifted in flying and engineering. It was great to see their to and fro with regards to the Millennium Falcon. Finn, on the other hand, was a bit of a surprise to me. I went into the film fully expecting him to be the new Jedi to be. I've got no idea if it was announced beforehand that wasn't the case, as I've avoided reading anything about it to go in with a blank slate. Finn turns out to be fairly gifted at shooting instead, both with a blaster and the turrets on board the TIE Fighter or Millennium Falcon. He seems to have no ability to use the Force, at least not yet, which surprised me. Finn is arguably the funniest character of the duo. One of his lines particularly stood out. When he lands on the First Order's base to disable the shields and Han asks if he actually knows how to disable the shields, Finn replies with, "No idea. It's fine, we'll just use the Force," and Han says, "That's not how the Force works," or something to that effect. I loved how much that played with the idea that the Force can do anything. It placed limitations on it. Finn was well within his right to think that the Force had this kind of power. That's why the line was so good. Finn is brave, righteous and funny. He's a very welcome character to the Star Wars universe. What's even more surprising is that the story of him being a stormtrooper beforehand actually makes sense. It was interesting to see Disney take on the idea of child soldiers, and it was pleasing to see that this storyline actually worked. Now we'll get on to the big bad wolf that is Kylo Ren. Kylo is one of the most pleasing villains to exist in the Star Wars universe. He's as threatening as a cold winter's night is to your nan. He's absolutely brutal and his Force abilities and lightsaber match that. I love the idea of the unstable red crystal. Not only does it appear more threatening, but it sort of reflects him. He's an unstable Knight of Ren, torn between the light and dark side. His voice was legitimately threatening too. They did it properly, looking at you, Dark Knight Rises. His past could have been explored more, such as telling us why he went to the dark side, but I suppose that will come in future installations. It was interesting to see someone who was already on the dark side feeling himself coming into the light, instead of the other way around. One negative I can say about him though is that Adam Driver really doesn't have a villainous face. Maybe Ren eventually comes into the light and so Adam Driver's look makes more sense. But if that were the case, then I would have kept him hidden until he comes into the light, or saved it only for his scene with Han on the bridge. There was a new Emperor-type character introduced called Snoke, who appeared to have some resemblance to the typical grey aliens. In the movie, he appears giant, and I really hope that's a hologram, as I think having a giant alien creature as the new evil Force is just a little cheap. Star Wars displays power via abilities and affinity with the Force, which is a very important point for later, not size. He's also called the Supreme Leader. Interesting name, don't you think? As for the returning characters, all of them were used brilliantly and weren't relied on. Han Solo had a much bigger role in the movie than I thought, but given the plot, it was absolutely necessary. His arc involved passing the baton, or in this case Falcon, to Rey, as well as dealing with the fact his son is for all intents and purposes a Sith. I know he's technically not a Sith by definition, but his powers, lightsaber and costume resemble a Sith, so don't get on my back about technicalities here. Leia was used the correct amount too, to simply orchestrate the Resistance attack and have a scene in which she and Han are reunited and discuss the dark side taking over their son. It was a shame we didn't get to see any indication of her Force sensitivity other than her wincing when Han died. I would have liked to have seen her wielding a lightsaber or performing some force moves, but maybe we'll get that later. 3PO was used quite comically, which was great. R2 was cast aside until the end, as he was in low power mode, or basically depressed since Luke left. Which brings me nicely onto the script. It pleases me to say that the movie doesn't rely on nostalgia too much, which I was so relieved to discover. Episode 7 could have totally thrown all its eggs in one basket and made a movie entirely based on fan service. Having Han and Leia reunite to take down the First Order, have Luke jumping about like a gymnast on roids cutting down foes left, right and centre, have the Millennium Falcon ruin everything in its wake and conjure up a villain that resembled Darth Vader. Instead, the movie uses Han as a core plot device which worked well. It uses Leia minimally. Luke is only in the movie for about 30 seconds right at the end and has no lines. Which is a shame, as I would have liked to have seen some dialogue from him, but I can understand why they're saving him for the sequel. I love that they made Luke a mysterious and dark figure. There's theories out there that he's susceptible to the dark side, as all Skywalkers seem to be, which could result in him turning into a Sith. The Falcon is used only when needed, and the times in the movie where they do play on nostalgia don't feel forced or ham-fisted. There was a lovely moment when Han re-enters the cockpit of the Falcon. It was a great sight to see again. His reunion with Leia and his banter with Chewie were also thoroughly enjoyable. Well done JJ for not relying on nostalgia to sell your movie. Or did he? Well, ultimately no, but like me, most people have noticed that this movie is basically a remake of Episode 4. Rey is the force-sensitive hero Luke, Finn is the brave blaster-capable hero Leia, BB-8 is the lovable quirky droid R2-D2, who happens to be carrying an important message critical to the Resistance, or Rebels. Jakku is pretty much the same as Tatooine, which is also the place our force-sensitive hero hails from. There was the whole father-son on opposite sides plot again with Han and Kylo Ren. On top of that, there's also the main plot device, the Death Star. Again. The movie even goes so far as to acknowledge it's reusing old ideas. In the briefing room, poor Dameron playfully says, we'll be able to blow it up, there's always seems to be a way to do that, or something along those lines. We get it, the Death Star is pretty much the ultimate space weapon, but this is the third time we're seeing it used as the main plot device of the dark side. I was thoroughly disappointed that the writers couldn't come up with something new. There's a lot of new in this movie with regards to characters and locations, but plot-wise it just seemed to retread old ideas a little too much and it left it feeling a little stale at times. One section of the movie that was done tremendously well was Han Solo's death. You just knew what was coming when you saw Kylo walking across the bridge and walked out to meet him. What I enjoyed most about this scene was that you could mute it and you'd still know what was going to happen. It was all told with lighting. When you see it again, look at Kylo and look at Han. Kylo's face is almost completely red with a little bit of blue on the right side. Han is also red but with much more blue. Han's red is not necessarily to do with the dark side, but he's jealous, he's obnoxious, and he's a smuggler. He's not a saint, but ultimately his heart is in the right place, hence the higher concentration of blue. We know Ren feels the light side pulling him with that fairly atrocious line, "I can feel it again, the light pulling me." Yeah, I hated that line. I'd much rather it showed that in actions, like him showing mercy to someone or maybe even setting someone free, and I suppose he does when he brings Rey on board the ship to interrogate her instead of outright killing her, but even that's a bit of a stretch. Anyway, Ren has a bit of light in him, but is obviously still mostly consumed by the darkness, hence red light being the dominant shine on him. Just before Han is killed, the light turns 100% red. As soon as that happened, I knew what was coming. Kylo murders his father with his red lightsaber and looks into his eyes as he does it. Han falls off the bridge and literally into the light below. It could have been done in a much more cliched and predictable way, but the way that this was handled and executed was fantastic. Again, this scene was somewhat reminiscent of A New Hope when Luke and Han are looking on as Ben is struck down by Vader. In this instance, Rey and Finn were helplessly looking on as Han was struck down by Ben Solo, Kylo Ren. Now, just about everything I've mentioned up to now has been positive, but there is a few heavy negatives that I have that will drag down the score. First of all, let me say that this is simply my opinion and view on the matters I mention. I'm not versed on anything Star Wars related aside from the movies, so please don't get at me for not knowing things that take place outside the movies. Besides, as I've already mentioned, Disney have said everything outside the movies, Clone Wars TV show and a New Day novel is considered not canon, so with that in mind I'll get on to my negatives. Firstly, Kylo Ren's aim is to be as powerful as Darth Vader. He looks up to him as an idol. Now, as a plot element on its own, that doesn't make much sense. Ren is consumed by the dark side, so it baffles me why someone would look up to Vader when it was Vader that ended the Sith once and for all. Yes, he was a powerful Sith, but he betrayed his master and killed him, allowing the Jedi and the rebels to defeat the Empire. Why Ren would idolize a traitor doesn't make much sense to me. Furthermore, as I've already mentioned, power in the Star Wars universe is largely depicted visually by a character's abilities. In Episode 3, Palpatine explains to Anakin that there was once a Sith so powerful and attuned with the Force that he could keep the ones he cared about from dying. He had the ability to save people from death. Palpatine enforces the fact that this guy was fucking strong and powerful. So that leads me to Kylo Ren's ambition to be as powerful as Vader. Now, Vader's abilities included force choking, exceptional lightsaber and pilot skills, and the psychotic ability to slaughter children. Vader is considered one of the most feared villains in movie history, and that's perfectly understandable. He's a large, half-man, half-machine with ominous breathing and a lack of social empathy, until Return of the Jedi, that is. The guy blows up a planet for God's sake, but his physical ability with the Force and with his lightsaber is displayed at a minimum. Vader uses the Force in a sort of passive-aggressive way, such as when he says,
"I find your lack of faith disturbing."
Now, Kylo Ren's affinity with the Force by comparison, to me, seems to be far beyond Vader's, based on his abilities. This guy can read people's minds, he can stop blaster shots with the Force, not even having to bother using his saber to deflect them. He can also freeze people in place just using the Force alone. Maybe Vader could do that too, but we don't see it. And as I've said, a character's strength with the Force in Star Wars movies seems to be displayed by what they can do, with the exception of Yoda, who shows strength in wisdom. To me, Ren was much more intimidating than Vader too. Vader was controlled, which is threatening in its own right, but Ren can absolutely lose his shit, which we see when he goes absolutely acca on computers with his lightsaber upon hearing bad news. Ultimately, what I'm saying is that Ren strives to be as powerful as Vader, yet to me he seems already just as powerful, if not more powerful. The only view I can look at is that Ren wants to be as politically powerful as Vader, like ruling the galaxy. Or maybe he wants to learn to be as controlled and calculated as Vader. They're the only reasons that make Ren's ambition make sense to me. Negative number 2 comes with Rey's ability with the Force. Throughout the movie, she has the same experiences as Luke as she discovers she's Force sensitive. We don't see her use it much other than when she performs a Jedi mind trick, battles Kylo Ren, and touches Luke's saber and can see into the past and future. Now, it's cool that she can do all of these things. She's Force sensitive after all. The problem comes with that she can do all of these things without any training whatsoever. I mean absolutely none. Now, the touching Luke's saber element I can get away with because that was maybe something she couldn't help. The other two, however, I can't let slide. What pissed me off is that Episode 5 and the entire prequel trilogy are about training Luke and Anakin respectively in using the Force. Rey performs a Jedi mind trick somehow. Now, a Jedi mind trick in the realm of the movies is exclusively used by trained Jedi only, never Siths or anyone else Force sensitive. So how was Rey able to perform a Jedi-specific move with no training? Furthermore, she is able to battle a trained Knight of Ren warrior who is clearly very powerful with the Force and win. When fighting Ren, she has that moment where he says to her, "Let me train you in the ways of the Force." And she's like, "Oh, I shit, the Force? I should probably use that." And then she battles him and wins. It was her "use the Force, Luke" moment. I get that. Only the original context of "use the Force, Luke" was to allow him to shoot a blaster shot into a small hole. And I get that some people can use the Force without knowing to perform actions, like how Anakin can pod race. But both of these actions are a world apart from battling a combat and Force-trained almost Sith warrior. The other argument is that she's a new prodigy, which also makes sense. But don't forget that Anakin was a prodigy. He had the highest midichlorian count ever, even higher than Yoda. He was officially labelled as the Chosen One and was even talked about in a prophecy as the one who would bring balance to the Force. He was the second coming of Jesus pretty much, and he still got his arse handed to him by Count Dooku in Attack of the Clones even after he had some training. Qui-Gon was a Jedi Master and he still got wrecked by Darth Maul at the end of Episode 1. So I just can't buy that Rey would be able to beat a trained and powerful Kylo Ren with absolutely no training with the Force, even if she is a prodigy. I can get on board with her lightsaber ability because she's fairly decent with that stick thing she has, but I feel like Ren, injured or not, would just destroy her in a fight. The fact that she beats him to me totally retcons the idea that Luke or Anakin even needed training at all, and that's why I absolutely hate this plot element. Because Kylo was beaten, it sort of ruined his character for me too, as he seemed to be very threatening but was then beaten by a completely untrained Force user. It left me with a very sour taste at the end of the movie. Now I'll get onto the technical side of the movie. One small element that annoyed me a little was that they changed the blaster sounds. Now I'm all for changing things up a bit to create something new, but it didn't make much sense when Han's gun, which was the same one he's always used, had a totally different sound. There's something very symbolic and inviting about the original Star Wars blaster sound. It's almost a motif of the series. Similarly, while this isn't a technical issue, I didn't like how Rey performed the Jedi mind trick without first making the hand gesture. Again, I can get that maybe Abrams thought that this feature was a little archaic, but it's again a symbol of the Star Wars universe. Whenever someone jokingly performs a Jedi mind trick on you, they always do the hand gesture. It was a shame that it got left by the wayside. A strong positive for The Force Awakens is that, like the original trilogy, it blends together CGI and real prosthetics in a logical and seamless way. They didn't CG everything that could be CG'd, such as Chewbacca. It was good to see a proper costume for him again. It would have been very easy for Abrams to make a CG orgy, get his paycheck and fuck off, so I'm glad he did a proper job and made a Star Wars movie how it should be made. If you come into this movie expecting action, then you certainly won't be disappointed. Episode 7 contains possibly the most action a Star Wars movie has ever had, and all the action scenes are exciting and invigorating. I've heard many people complain that the prequels were too invested in politics and lacked on the action front, which I can agree with. So anybody with those issues will find Episode 7 an absolute blast. It's thoroughly entertaining and engaging. JJ Abrams' biggest challenge was to make a movie that still felt like a Star Wars movie, and he absolutely does that. The locations, characters, costume, droids, vehicles, and overall feel of the movie still oozes Star Wars, albeit brought to a modern age. Abrams successfully blends together elements of the prequels and originals to entice 3 generations of Star Wars fans, and I have to commend him for that. So to sum up, I'd say that anybody wanting a Star Wars film better than the prequels will probably get one. As a standalone film, it's thoroughly entertaining and is very well made, using CG and prosthetics properly. The new characters are engaging and it's interesting to see where their arcs will take them. Kylo Ren is arguably one of the best villains of Star Wars canon by far, and blending the old characters with the new was done superbly. However, as a Star Wars film, unfortunately for me, it was let down by Kylo Ren's unfathomable aim to be as powerful as Darth Vader, when he already seems to be, and the complete disregard and retcon of necessary Jedi training with regards to Rey. Those points brought the quality of the movie down heavily for me. I've heard people criticise the prequels for the introduction of midichlorians, which is fine, and for the inconsistencies with the Jedi Code and teachings. If that's the case, then I feel like I'm well within reason to criticise this movie for having a lax and poor approach to the idea of the Jedi and the Force in general, by having Rey able to perform complex Jedi abilities and win a battle against the Knight of Ren with absolutely no training. So, with that in mind, I have to give Star Wars The Force Awakens 3.5 frames out of 5. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Film Rant.